So in this segment, we're going to be talking about how economists, a survey of economists, people to feel worse off as inflation and tax rises bite in 2022. So what the FT did was they surveyed around 100 economists. I'm not going to go through them all because that would be like a 2 hour long or an hour long video, which no one really wants to see that. But we're going to look at some of the I haven't read through all of the different economist points. I've read through some of them. Some of them do have varying opinions, where some of them are more optimistic than others. Some talk about how there are still major problems in the UK. I just wanted to, before we look at the actual opinions of the economists, we'll go through what the Financial Times has put up here, and then I'll do some housekeeping notes before we go into the different opinions. So, economists expect the UK living standards to deteriorate in 2022 as inflation and rising taxes hit poorer households. This is predominantly Rishi Sunak raising national insurance, which is a tax, onto poorer and working class people, which is absolutely so stupid. Even from an economic point of view, you need people in, sort of working class people and poorer people to have more money. That's one of the things that will drive the economy forward, people spending. If you give money to rich people, what are they going to do? Keep it in their savings account. Maybe they'll invest it, maybe they won't. They might buy government bonds, who knows? But if you give it to poorer people, they're more likely to, maybe do house renovations or go to a restaurant or pay off bills that they've been putting off, things where the money goes back into the economy. While supply chain blockages and Brexit-related trade underperformance will limit economic growth. So let's look at each one. So we covered the taxes. Inflation is rising. Brexit is a factor in that, especially with the supply chain blockages, where imports are now being checked, which is going to cause another choke point for imports going into the UK. That's a further blockage of raw materials going to manufacturing hubs within the UK, and that's going to cause further problems with productivity. We've talked previously about how Honda have had issues getting in parts and tools into their factories because it's stuck in Dover. Brexit-related trade underperformance will limit economic growth. The Financial Times annual survey of nearly 100 economists, I didn't know this was annual, it's quite cool, revealed that most expect inflation to outpace wages. So that's a huge problem, because if inflation is outpacing wages, that means that's a real terms cut in people's living standards. If inflation goes up by 3% and wages go up by 1%, that's a real terms cut of around 2%. And that means less money with people who are likely to spend the money and push pounds back into the economy, essentially. While COVID-19 will continue to disrupt production and consumption, it is a global pandemic. The world is hit by this. At the same time, high energy costs, which again are impacting the rest of the world, but because we are outside of the EU's internal energy market and we have low reserves of things like gas, it's made our situation far worse. And the increase in national insurance contributions will hit those on lower incomes hardest. I mean, again, this is a consequence more of the UK's poor management under the Tories specifically, but also Brexit playing a large part in that, exacerbating these problems even more. A majority of respondents who said the UK's recovery would lag behind that of comparable economies, with many of them blaming this underperformance on political instability and the lack of any credible long-term economic strategy. That turns off foreign investors, and the UK is falling down in terms of the amounts of foreign direct investment we're receiving from other countries and people who live abroad. Although many countries are experiencing high inflation, supply chain disruptions and labour shortages, which is all true, the US are facing all of these similar problems as well. Brexit would make these problems more severe in the UK, economists have said, potentially prompting the Bank of England to raise interest rates. Again, another bad move, more rapidly than other central banks. Raising interest rates is not, in my opinion, a good idea right now. Some did see grounds for optimism. I mean, not all economists are pessimists. There are grounds for optimism. I don't think it's that warranted. Noting in particular that the pandemic has sparked a new wave of investment in technology and digitalization, which is great, but we are seeing kind of less EU students come into the UK. And the fact is, if some of the more kind of techie people in the UK get job offers in the EU where they can work around in different countries, they might take those offers, causing a brain drain within the UK. Or should I say a further brain drain? Because so digitalization, which could strengthen next year because of generous tax support. So the only way we're actually going to progress in this sphere is through the tax ban, the taxpayer subsidising it, which again is more socialism, which this government is supposedly against. Many also doubted that those gains would be accompanied by policies necessary to boost productivity in the long term, such as investment in skills, training, and pro-investment regulations. The problem is businesses are expecting the government to pay for training and skills and development, whilst the government are expecting businesses to pay for it. That seems to be a key problem. So, will the UK outpace or lag behind other developed economies in 2022 or why? And this, in my opinion, is a stupid question. The question should be, will the UK outpace or lag behind other G8 economies? Because if we look at the Eurozone, you have a whole host of different countries with different sized economies. You have Austria, Belgium, Cyprus, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Ireland, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Malta, the Netherlands, Portugal, Slovakia, Slovenia, and Spain. Now, why is this a dumb comparison? Because we should be looking at G8 countries, because these are more comparable to us, economically speaking. With the exception of the United States, Japan, economy number 3. You have France and Germany, I think their economy is number 4 and 5. The UK is 6 or 7. Canada is around 8, I believe. And so these are the economies we should be compared to, because these are much larger economies and far more comparable to the UK, rather than comparing ourselves to the Eurozone, which has, yes, France, Germany and Italy, but also has much smaller economies as well. So again, I don't think comparing ourselves to the EU or the Eurozone is very bright, because there are other countries that will drag down the overall numbers. It's not a dig at these countries. Some countries are just economically smaller than others. Austria's economy, would you compare that to a France or a Germany? You wouldn't, because it's a much smaller economy, much smaller population, and they do very different things. So I don't think comparing ourselves to the Eurozone, the UK to the Eurozone, actually makes sense. Some more housekeeping notes is that there's an economist in here somewhere, I can't remember exactly which one, but he talks about how the Omicron impact is very mild, so that's not going to have an impact as much on the UK. But we've seen, COVID absences putting huge pressure on hospitals in England, which will cause further problems and more people outside of the workforce, because that's what really economists care about. With nurses union saying the hospitals aren't safe. And if we actually look at hospitalizations quickly, you can see we're currently at around 2,272, around that kind of figure for average people admitted to hospital with COVID. That number's going up fairly steadily. If you look at during the heights of the second wave, you can see 3,937. So we're not a million miles away from these numbers, and this graph is spiking very rapidly. And you've got here, around 2,870. So we're looking at closer towards the first wave of numbers. And the thing is, these are people out of the workforce, and that does have a massive economic impact. That's what economists will really look at here. But further to that, the people who argue, oh yeah, Omicron's just mild, you're less likely to die from it. Fair enough, true. But you just, it's likely that you might end up in the hospital, which again, takes up resources and has an economic cost, which these people, or at least this specific economist, fails to understand. I don't want to take a dig at people specifically or question credentials. I'm not here to do that, especially since I'm not an economist. But in my opinion, at least, just judging the pandemic based on deaths and deaths as the main statistic, I think is very stupid. It should be based around hospitalizations, because we can see the hospitals currently are not doing too great. Anyways, enough of that. We'll look at the specifics of what's going on. So going back to the question, will the UK economy outpace or lag behind other developed economies? And again, there's a problem with how do you define a developed economy. But we move. Melanie Baker, senior economist at the Royal London Asset Management. UK growth is likely to lag the US. We are already lagging behind the Americans. They're back to pre-pandemic levels, and we're not. Partly given a different outlook on fiscal policy, if Joe Biden's Build Back Better bill passes. The problem is it's gone from 3.5 trillion to 1.8 trillion, and even then it's not like to pass because of Joe Manchin. Maybe I'll do more American politics in the future. Omicron looks set to weigh significantly on the UK economy in Q1. We've already talked about the numbers a bit, though Omicron will likely become an issue for more economies in the coming weeks, given its apparent high transmissibility, and also depends, countries peak at different times. So you can see here that she's not cited Brexit specifically, she cited more fiscal policy, and the UK is in control of its own fiscal policy. We control our own currency, and that does help a lot in some regards. Kate Barker, trustee at the British Coal Pension Scheme, said, the UK may outpace the EU faster recovery from a Omicron impact, but lag the US due to US fiscal stimulus. So again, they're starting the fiscal stimulus, but I suppose maybe she's saying that because we're peaking now with COVID numbers and the sort of Eurozone countries aren't, that's going to be the key factor. And Nicholas Barr, professor at public economics at London School of Economics, saying more likely to lag behind the other countries. He says, my summary is that the UK will be in the middle of the pack in terms of response to the pandemic. And because, these kind of countries like Austria, and I think Finland, Greece, Ireland, they're classed as developed economies, you can say the UK will be in the middle of the pack, when realistically the question should have been, where will the UK be compared to other G7 members? I say G8 countries, it's the G7 now, isn't it? Because Russia are outseas. So again, they're saying the UK isn't going to be in the middle of the pack, but should the UK really be in the middle of the pack for developed countries, given that we're the 7th biggest economy in the world? So Ray Barrell, Professor of Economics and Finance at Brunel, University of London. Oh God, pronunciations. This person, he gives a really good answer. I do like his answer. The negative structural effects of Brexit are still working through the UK economy. We're still not doing full absolute import checks yet, and we've only just started doing some of them recently, and that's going to have a further impact down the line on manufacturing and other kind of things. And this is the main reason why UK growth will lag behind other advanced economies in 2022. The OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, said over the medium term, the self-harm inflicted by the exit of the EU will reduce productivity by 4%. And the problem is, if productivity takes a hit and you have less goods or less services to sell, that's going to have a major impact on the economy. And we may expect this to reduce growth by around 0.5% in 2022. That's just on productivity alone. The UK would take a 0.5% impact on GDP. The UK workforce is less likely to grow rapidly than in the past because of inward migration will be lower, and the UK is very reliant on migration to do the jobs that British people don't want to do, or more likely don't have the expertise to do. We've talked previously about how certain hospitality places are struggling because people don't have the expertise to do those job roles, to be, front house, to be the maitre d' or the head chef, those are, very not rare skills to have, but those require a lot of training and a lot of people skills, which evidently people in the UK either haven't got or haven't had the training to get. And we know that the government aren't a fan of paying to train people. Many of the southern and eastern European migrants are likely to move towards the more advanced economies of North and West Europe rather than the UK, because they don't need a visa to go into countries like Spain or France, and that's going to help those other countries rather than us. Northern and Western European growth will be enhanced by migration diversion, the UK growth disadvantage perhaps by 0.2%. Poor design of policies towards COVID-19 will not help raise UK growth, nor will the relatively low rates of vaccination in the UK as compared to Northern and Western European countries, but the effects are hard to quantify without, that higher vaccination. I think the majority of people in intensive care units are not vaccinated, and that's people outside the workforce and people who aren't contributing. I don't want to make this a full on, if you're not contributing, you need to die sort of conversation, but I think that's what economists kind of look at. If you're not in the workforce, what kind of impact does that have? And as COVID goes through the country with more and more people sick, especially in a place like London, that does have a massive economic toll. Martin Beck, Chief Economic Advisor, EY Item Club, the UK should outpace at least the average of developed economies in 2022. Again, how is that a fair comparison, seeing as we're economy number 7, and you could have, developed economies, that OECD countries, you have the top 20 economies. So if we're in, say, the average, so we're going to be outpacing sort of economies 12 to, say, 6 average, so 12 to, say, 9 or whatever. I mean, it doesn't make sense, the question itself. He talks about that the fiscal position of households is as strong as it's ever been, combined with a healthy jobs market, should fill the traditional appetite for UK consumers to spend. And again, this is he's one of the people that really I'm going to use that word, triggered me in this one, because the position for UK financial households is not as strong as it's ever been. If anything, it's incredibly weak right now, with rampaging energy costs, rising food costs, a lack of wage increases. How is it that the fiscal position of UK households is as strong as it's ever been? If anything, right now, it's in a very precarious position, with energy bills soaring, people's energy companies going bankrupt and then being charged an extra £90 to £100 per month, depending on the provider they've been allocated and how much energy they use compared to their previous supplier. The cost the previous supplier charged. I mean, that's such a ridiculous statement from Martin Beck, the chief economic advisor at the EY Item Club. Jesus Christ, man. The fiscal position of households is as strong as ever. Nah, bro. Nah, definitely not. Jesus, that's a painful one, that is. The UK appears to be taking a more learn to live approach with COVID-19 than other countries, should also mean a more cautious attitude towards economically destructive social distancing measures or lockdowns. The problem is, potentially there is a lockdown coming because of the situation with the amount of people in hospital and the fact that the hospitals right now are overrun. They're getting rid of routine operations again, which is going to cause further problems for people who have pains or scans that they need to get done, which will cause more problems down the line. I mean, Martin Beck, mate, you are not on the. You would not make my top list of economists in this list of people. I mean, Jesus. But he's one of the ones I took issue with. So, David Bell, Professor of Economics, University of Stirling. Sorry, pronunciations. It will continue to lag, so the UK will continue to lag other developed countries due to a combination of more adverse effect of the pandemic has had on the UK economy. That's partly down to the nature of the UK economy and the incompetence of the government, and Brexit induced trade friction. So predominantly imports and exports get checked, and that makes the UK a kind of worse country to trade with. You can see here that the forecasts have been, taken down quite significantly. And January 21 is around this point, April 21, where the pandemic first kind of hit. You can see the slope, but you can see it further goes down significantly by well over 0.5% there, almost by a whole percentage point. The UK's forecasts have been downplayed, and no doubt if the Tories kind of surpass these numbers, they're going to take a victory lap. Philip Booth, Professor of Economics, Wyzern Centre, University of Buckingham, said it will be more or less likely to keep pace. There is nothing about the UK economic policy that marks it out from other countries in terms of ability to increase productivity. I mean, other countries can allow more kind of inward migration to boost their productivity. The UK can't do that, especially since there's no freedom of movement and we're being stingy with visas. Thanks, Priti Patel. So that does mark it out from other countries. And the fact that Sunak's quite stingy with the money as well. Other countries may be more fiscally lax than the UK, which will help them boost their economies, and the UK will lag behind because we have people who are economically inept in government. Nick Bosanquet, sorry I butchered his name there, Professor of Health Policy, Imperial College, said the UK will be around the average, plus the fact that the UK small business service economy is working well. I mean, is it though? SMEs are struggling massively because we're out of the EU, and some of them are struggling to get workers, having to increase wages, which again is good for people, but is a hit that businesses are going to take in the hopes that if more people have money, they can spend it in with these small businesses. The service economy working well, yeah. Service is doing okay for the most part, but will they still be okay when kind of the EU's agreement with the UK ends on certain financial services? Will they still be okay? Minus is that supply delays, trade shifts as a result of Brexit will be negative. I mean, again, we'll be around the average. This goes back to how do you define developed economies? Are all the top 20 OECD countries developed economies? Because, again, should we be in the average at that point? Not the best question. Eric Britton, Managing Director at Fathom Consulting, the UK will probably lag behind the US and broadly keep pace with the EU. Again, there are lots of different kinds of economies within the EU. The US is unlikely to impose any further restrictions nationwide. The US didn't impose nationwide restrictions. They can't. I don't think the federal government would really do that. It's up to the individual states to do that. That's why New York has very different rules to California. I mean, again, I really don't get your point there. I don't think the US actually imposed a nationwide lockdown. It was up to the states to decide what they wanted to do. That's why Florida's been hit quite badly. Well, that might happen in the UK and the EU, and the damage to the level of GDP in the UK wrought by Brexit has largely already been done. I mean, again, that's not really true either, because we've only just started doing import checks. We don't know the full damage they're going to do to companies, as the IT systems don't even work properly. That's something we've covered previously. So the idea that the damage has already been done is simply not the case. And not to forget the fact that Liz Truss is still saber rattling with the EU and threatening to do Article 16. If the UK do that, then we're not going to see anywhere near the impact that we would see in a post Article 16 world, where effectively we go back to a no deal situation, which would be an absolute disaster. So, bro, like, again, Eric Britton, I would probably rethink what you've written here, in my opinion, anyways. So we'll keep pace with the EU from a slightly lower level. And again, the EU has multiple different, levels of economy within the EU. So again, comparing ourselves to the EU economically doesn't make any sense. Jagjit Chandha, the director of NIESR, said the UK economy does not look well placed to lead the advanced pack in 2022. A combination of a ragged edge over Brexit and political uncertainty will continue to hamper what might otherwise have been a stronger recovery. Which is true that without this, a lot of political uncertainty, that causes problems. We could go into lockdown in a week or two, and none of us would know right now if that's going to happen. Specifically, trade investment and foreign direct investment are unlikely to recover strongly, and the skills gap in the labour market simply cannot easily be addressed. Easily be addressed very easily in the coming. I used easily a bit too much there, but the simple fact is, in order to replace the kind of EU workers that we have lost, who have specific skills and expertise, we're going to have to train people in this country to get those skills and expertise. The problem is that takes a long time, and the other problem is the UK does charge for some of these colleges and other places do charge for these lessons. To take a carpentry course, it costs money, and if you don't have the money up front, then you're not going to be able to take the course. You're not going to be able to skill up. That's going to cause further problems, especially since the UK is struggling with a shortage of electricians, carpenters, and other kind of construction-orientated roles. I know obviously electricians have jobs post once a house is built, but if we kind of pigeonhole it as that, we have a massive shortage of those skills, and if you're going to charge people to reskill in those specific areas, that's going to cause further problems. The government should be subsidising it, or it should be free. But Jadgit Chanda, some good points here. We go on. We're going to skip a few of these. Brian Colton, chief economist at Fitch Ratings, said in growth terms the UK will outperform a bit, but this is largely reflects the UK's lagging GDP recovery to date. Because the UK fell the furthest, it has the highest to rise, so we can easily get back some of the numbers just by getting out of lockdown and a few other things. But the problem is stimulating economic growth past kind of the pre-COVID levels would be very difficult. Diane Coyle, Bennett Professor of Public Policy, University of Cambridge, said old problems, low investment, low levels of private research and development, inadequate infrastructure, the dysfunctional housing market, policy instability, and new problems, Brexit headwinds, political uncertainty, loss of skilled migrant labour mean the UK will lag behind comparable economies. So if we have a look, low investments, that'll be predominantly about the government and foreign direct investment, even though the UK has pretty decent foreign direct investment numbers. Low investment from the government, I assume she's talking about, which is true. The amount of stimulus we've seen from Sunak is nowhere near enough. Low levels of private R&D, I mean, some of those are gone, like Dyson the move to Singapore. Inadequate infrastructure, our infrastructure is rubbish. Public transport is rubbish, and that's something the government could improve and really should have done, but they've kind of scaled back the, quote, build back better, and they've scaled down HS2 and other things, which is just completely insane from the government. The dysfunctional housing market, I mean, housing prices in this country are a joke, ridiculously expensive, especially now. Political instability, we have, Boris Johnson, who has no idea what he's doing, let's be real here, and new problems, the Brexit headwinds, which we saw some of it last year, impacting productivity, the supply chain, and export checks have caused massive problems, and import checks I think will cause more problems than export checks, in my opinion. Political uncertainty, which the Tories, and we might have a change in Prime Minister. The loss of skilled migrant labour, again, people think, people in the UK seem to think that, it's just unskilled or sort of lower skilled people from the EU come to work in the UK. No, people from the EU have a whole range of skills, from construction to, again, hospitality, which itself is a skill. It requires training, expertise. People, managing people is a skill in itself. Engineers, people that work in the construction field. We've lost so many, and we don't train enough, so that's a huge problem. Bronwyn Curtis, non-executive director at the UK office at the OBR, saying the UK will lag the US, but do a bit better than the Eurozone. Again, I can't be asked to rehash my opinion of that point. Japan will lag behind the rest of the developed economies. I mean, what's with the drive-by of Japan? Leave Japan alone. The current macro environment is extraordinary, stimulative in the US. I mean, is it though? I mean, the US, unless they do another round of $2,000 checks and build back better, that's not going to happen. The fiscal outlays alone are comparable to, as a percentage of GDP, to the outlays of World War II, which we kind of needed, huge amounts of fiscal stimulus. But again, the US hasn't passed a ton of stimulus as far as I'm aware. They did pass an infrastructure bill, I think, last year. It wasn't that big. But the fact is that 3.5 trillion Build Back Better bill isn't happening. So I don't know if they're still factoring in the Build Back Better bill or not. The US looks set to withdraw the stimulus more slowly than the UK, and that's going to cause a huge problem. Again, the UK has control over its own currency and could do more fiscal spending if it wanted to, but the political kind of dogma of people like Rishi Sunak is just insane. Paul Dales, chief UK economist at Capital Economics: don't be fooled by the UK's GDP growth figures, which will make the UK which will make it look as though the UK is soaring ahead. Our GDP forecasts for the UK for 2022 and 23 are 4.8% and 3.5% compared to 3% and 2% for the US and 3.5 and 1.5 for the Eurozone. The UK's decent growth figures are mostly a statistical mirage generated by the pandemic. I'm assuming what he's talking about here is the fact that the UK fell the furthest, and therefore as we get back up, it will look like we're growing rapidly when we're just getting back the numbers that we lost, really, because of our stupid COVID policies. In terms of the level of GDP, the UK will continue to lag behind the US and the Eurozone for most of 2022 for three reasons. So let's have a look at each one. First, the UK is having a bad experience with Omicron, which will suppress activity by more, which is true. We're having a really bad bout, especially because restrictions aren't being put back in place. And I don't think people are really adhering to kind of doing the optional stuff, like not really meeting people, wearing masks, etc. Second, it's the product and job shortages seem to be having a bigger drag on activity than elsewhere. Are there really job shortages, or there's massive amounts of vacancies? The problem is it's mainly within the hospitality sector, which is a huge problem for middle management people. Product problems are a problem because manufacturing will slow down, predominantly because they're struggling to get the workers in and also the raw materials they need to actually make stuff. So that's going to be a huge problem. Third, the hikes in taxes in April 22 will be another drag. You keep taking money out of the hands of poorer and working class people, you're going to have huge economic problems. Let's put it that way. That said, once the worst of the Omicron and the shortage is passed, the UK's GDP will probably start catching up with the GDP in the US and the Eurozone. So the UK is behind, it's down, but it's not out. The problem is, by comparing it again to the Eurozone, it kind of makes us look better because we'll be average in the Eurozone when we should be compared to G7 or G8 countries. So Richard Davies, the director, I promise that there's not a ton more I want to go through, in case anyone is getting bored by this point. How long have we been talking for? Oh my god, a long time. Okay. We move. We'll keep going. Richard Davies, the director of Economics Observatory, saying in the longer run, I expect the UK to be a mid-tier performer compared to the G7 and OECD pairs. Again, a mid-performer amongst the G7. So you're saying would be kind of doing very well. I don't think that's going to be the case. And OECD pairs, again, I think they have an OECD top 20 countries. Are you comparing us to the 20 other top economies in the world? It doesn't make sense, because this is what our long-term productivity performance justifies. I mean, does it? Based on what? The UK has had a turbulent 10 to 15 years, and the sooner we move on from emergencies of one type or another, finance, so he's talking about the 07-08 financial crash, Brexit, COVID-19, and back to traditional concerns, energy, industrial strategy, productivity as the primary focus, our economic debate will be better. The problem here is that Brexit impacts industrial strategy and productivity massively. So we're not going to go back to traditional concerns, really, because we've made those traditional concerns far worse. Also, the fact that the UK, the Tories don't know how to recover properly from economic disasters. that's a huge problem. That's one of the reasons why we haven't actually been doing that well for the last 10 years. Howard Davies, chair of NatWest. The Brexit drag will be felt, so the UK is likely to grow less rapidly than the US and the core of the Eurozone. So he's saying, the core, so you're talking about maybe the top 10 members of the Eurozone. Again, it's very nebulous. It's not a great question. Melissa Davies, the director of the Economics Observatory, saying Brexit hangovers and squeeze real income suggest growth will undershoot expectations of 4 to 5% and come in more at 2 to 2.5%. I mean, that's half, really. But this could still be better than the Eurozone and around in line with the US, Brave. Indeed, it is not all doom and gloom. If inflation decelerates sharply, as we expect, I mean, what makes you think inflation is going to decelerate? Energy prices are going to continue to go up. Oil refineries that produce petrol are taking the mick with prices. With the UK, I think the RAC saying that UK motorists are being charged around 5 million more than they should be because of the fact that these guys are running off with a load of money and charging people prices they shouldn't be. So again, what makes you think inflation is going to decelerate, especially with import checks coming in? She doesn't say. So Omicron is a mild and swift route to higher levels to herd immunity. I mean, again, more people are going to end up in hospital, and the antibodies from COVID don't last that long. So the statement she's making here isn't that great. The service sector could bounce back nicely from the spring. I mean, sure, but are they still going to be here to bounce back? Or manufacturing will benefit from easing supply chain pressures and restocking. Again, I don't want to be mean to these people because they have credentials I can only dream of having. Manufacturing will benefit from easing supply chain pressure. What? How will it ease? How will it get better as we're doing import checks? It's going to get worse. That guy, Kieran, the van driver, was saying he was in the Dover-Calais crossing, I think, for like 12 hours or something ridiculous. Jesus Christ, what is this? They're going to get worse. And restocking, they're going to struggle to do that. They were struggling to do it last year when we weren't doing import checks. What makes you think this year is going to be better? She must have a crystal ball or something. I hope she does. Man like Paul, professor at the London School of Economics, saying, I believe the UK will lag behind other developed economies in 2022, mainly as a result of the collateral damage that Brexit will continue to impose on the UK economy. Recoveries are driven by optimism about the future. That optimism drives investment. Brexit will impose chronic pessimism about the future of the UK economy. And that right there is a phenomenal point from Mr. Paul. Because you're not going to invest in a country you don't have confidence in, and what that'll do is further drag down that country. It's one of the things that dragged down Germany post-World War I, where people just didn't have faith in Germany and their currency, and people stopped investing in German currency, and it didn't end well for Germany post-World War I. Let's not rehash history, huh? But not great. Man like Paul, agree with that. Panikos Dimitriadis, the Emeritus Professor of Economics and former Governor of the Central Bank of Cyprus. What a guy. University of Leicester. Well, that's a big coup for them, getting someone in like that. He says, however, by itself, the Omicron variant cannot cause any major disparities with other developed economies. I mean, again, I don't believe in that statement because the UK is dealing with Omicron worse than other developed countries are. What will hold the UK back the UK relative to other developed countries is the cost of Brexit in the form of increased border costs, labour shortages, and their impact on output and trade, which is true. If you can't get products in and workers in to manufacture the goods you need to sell, you're going to face huge problems. That's an issue. There's also the possibility that the UK's monetary policy may need to become tighter earlier than the other developed countries, as inflation pressures are likely to be more pronounced in the UK due to the impact of Brexit on trade shortages. And what that means is that if the Bank of England keeps raising interest rates and Rishi Sunak, continues to be fiscally stingy, it's going to cause huge problems in the economy. So again, a really interesting point here from the former governor of the Central Bank of Cyprus. There's some more here. Woutner Denhan, Professor of London School of Economics. Professor at the London School of Economics. The UK economy will lag behind because its supply chain problems and difficulties in filling in vacancies will be larger. Again, very hard to dispute that statement. Swati Dingra, Associate Professor of London School of Economics. UK's got the added impact of Brexit over and above the global trend, so lag behind, which is true. All countries are dealing with COVID and rising energy costs, but as a result of Brexit, our problems are far worse. Okay, we've got some more here. Wallman Evan, Vice President Senior Credit Officer at Sovereign Risk Group Moody's Investors Services, saying the UK economy will be among the last of the developed economies to recover its pre-pandemic output, given the significant impact of the pandemic on the UK's service-reliant economy, particularly if the new variant necessitates further restrictions, which, again, they do necessitate further restrictions. The question is, are the government going to do it? That's the key question, as well as the headwinds of private investment and exports from ongoing Brexit-related uncertainty. While most supply-side disruptions are expected to be temporary, these supply bottlenecks have been compounded by labour shortages, reflecting both the pandemic and the tighter immigration rules. Since Brexit, Patel doesn't want to give out visas. That's a problem. With the relationship between supply disruptions, labour shortages, and Brexit particularly evident in those sectors such as hospitality and transport, high inflation, high energy bills, and planned tax rises will erode household purchasing power, weighing on private consumption. And this, again, is a phenomenal point from Mr. Evan. Let's have a look. High inflation, the UK, other countries are struggling with inflation, but the UK is dealing with it far worse because of Brexit and other, governmental problems. High energy bills, we're outside the EU's internal energy market. That's a huge problem. We don't produce enough electricity and things like that ourselves. We are reliant on foreign supplies, and when supply is short, other countries will either keep supply for themselves or raise prices on us. That's another huge problem. When we were a part of the internal energy market, we would have a say in these things. We're not in it anymore. Planned tax rises will erode household purchasing power. Again, raising national insurance is a very stupid and fiscally illiterate thing, economically illiterate thing to do from this government. And, this is the government. Three things here. Two things the government had some control over, and one thing the government has absolute control over and is making an absolute mess of it. I think there was a couple more things I wanted to say, wanted to cover here. So, former senior official, we should be catching up after suffering a bigger hit last year than most economies, but the continuing problems with trade and labour supply are like to hold us back, even if fiscal policies continue to be relaxed. The problem is fiscal policies are not going to continue to be relaxed. The furlough scheme probably isn't coming back. So that's a huge problem. So this dude's saying this person, former senior advisor, saying even if we continue to be fiscally relaxed, we're still going to face continued problem because of the lack of labour and the lack of and the supply chain problems. Sorry, I'm struggling with words. Very long video. Andrew Hilton, Director for Centre of Study for the Financial Innovation, says, who writes these questions? What happens if it's just in the pack? Which is more likely. Again, that's a great point. Who writes these questions? What if it's in the middle of the pack? And the problem is, because the Eurozone is such a broad number of countries with very different economies, and also the phrase developed economies, you're talking about a lot of different countries. We should be considered we should be kind of compared to G7 countries. That should be the mark here, not comparing ourselves to the top 20 economies or the Eurozone. It doesn't make sense. So Dawn Holland, fellow at NIESR, said weak productivity growth exacerbated by the impacts of Brexit will see the UK economy continuing to lag behind other developed economies in 2022. Really, these are the things that we've talked about kind of previously in the video. Paul Hollingsworth, Chief European Executive at BNP, not the British National Party, Paribas, saying although its annual real GDP growth is likely to be higher than other developed countries in 2022, this reflects a lower starting point for the level of GDP as opposed to genuine outperformance. And that's another key point here, that we might see a decent amount of growth. That the problem is we're just getting back to kind of where we were because we've fallen so far compared to other countries. I think we had the worst kind of economic statistics from amongst other kind of comparable countries. I think our GDP shrunk, I can't remember what it was, like 8% or something, some crazy high number. So once, the economy starts ticking back up, the numbers are going to look great because we've fallen the furthest. But in terms of going higher, in terms of, actual kind of economic performance in the future, we're going to lag behind because we have huge problems. Again, I'm no economics expert, that's George's realm of expertise here. That's not me. There's a lot more. They asked, nearly 100 economists. There are so many more here. These are kind of the top ones I pulled out as I read through. Probably around 20 economists. You can get a broad feel of it from what most of them are saying, and they do kind of covering in the top. But point being is that the UK is going to struggle dramatically. Partially, I think a large part down to Brexit. It's because of supply chain issues, which will last until we rejoin the single market and customs union, really. The lack of, the workforce, people to come into the country to actually do the jobs that Brits don't have the expertise to do or don't want to do. That's a huge problem, not having those people here to really help us. The lack of, customs officers as well, that's going to play a huge part in this. And companies, you're talking about investment that we're losing. What about investment that we're going to lose because of this? Which companies are going to want to invest in the UK with all the problems we have? The government unwilling to kind of retrain people and help the kind of average person get the skills they need in order to skill up and go into different professions, and businesses reluctant to give out training to people. That's going to cause further problems. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. It's decent work from the FT. Again, I would not ask this question. I would ask the question, how will the UK do compared to other kind of G7 or G8 countries? Or say the top 10 economies in the world. That's how I would have phrased it. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. It's been a really long video, so if you stuck it out to the end, thank you. I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Oh my god, it's 40 minutes.